Hello everyone. The topic of today's case is one we don't touch on enough, and that is the topic of human trafficking. Which YouTube is probably not going to like this video, but honestly, I don't care. The fact that topics like this get censored, I think, is completely ridiculous, and I think that they still need to be talked about. So without further ado, let's talk about a Canadian woman who would vanish in the United States. Jessica Edith Louise Foster, who went by Jessie, was born on May 27th of 1984 to her parents Glendine Grant and Dwight Foster. She grew up in Kamloops, British Columbia, and was described as popular, full of life and love, well-behaved, responsible, and thrived in the close-knit community she was born into. It was so close-knit that her school was actually across the street from her home. Jessie also had a sense of humor. She loved to dance, joke around, and play pranks. During high school, Jessie would move to Calgary, Alberta, to live with her father and finish her last 2 years of school. After this, she stayed and worked in Calgary, planning to eventually go to university there. In April of 2005, Jessie was now 20 years old, and she was invited to go on a free vacation to the United States by a man named Donald Vaz, who she met while she was living in Calgary. Now, I don't know the exact path of where they traveled first, however, I do know they flew to Florida at one point. They also spent time in the Manhattan area of New York City, and they'd eventually traveled to Atlantic City, New Jersey. Now, this was only meant to be a short trip because Jessie had 2 jobs back home in Calgary that she worked. They were expecting her to come back. However, the day before Jessie was meant to fly home, she'd call her mother and tell her that the man who she was with on the trip, who, as far as I know, was Donald Vaz, was asking her to prostitute herself because he had apparently lost all their money while he was gambling in Atlantic City. As far as I read, this was the first time that her family would learn of this high-risk lifestyle that Jessie was living, or at least being forced into. Glendine saying, and I quote, "She said the trips were free. All I could say was that there's no free trips. It doesn't matter what I said. I couldn't get her to come home any sooner. We talked on the phone almost every day. I was thinking, this is ridiculous. But of course, she was 20 years old." End quote. So her family seemingly tried to get her to come home. They tried to get her to come back. But despite all of that, she was an adult. They technically couldn't do much, despite the red flags starting to pop up. So last I said, Jessie was meant to fly home, but then she called her mother the day before, telling her that there was this situation going on. The next thing her family knew, Jessie was calling from Las Vegas, saying she had taken money out of her savings, met some new friends there, and decided she was going to stay there for her 21st birthday, to celebrate it in Las Vegas, have, a memorable 21st birthday. Which her family at this point was a little bit confused, it seems, because last they knew she was supposed to be coming home. She was saying that this man she was with was trying to force her to sell her body for money because he lost all of it, and now she's all of a sudden in Vegas saying she's going to stay there even longer to celebrate her 21st birthday. But her family now had a goalpost. She was going to come home after her 21st birthday. When Jessie's 21st birthday came and went, days turned to weeks and weeks turned to months, and Jessie still didn't come home. Despite this, Jessie did stay in constant contact with her family. However, with each phone call, she would make a new excuse as to why she couldn't return back to Canada. Glendine saying, and I quote, "The next excuse she gave us was, oh, I met a guy. Oh, I love him. Oh, I'm going to live with him. Oh, he's wonderful. Oh, we're engaged. He's everything." End quote. This man went by the name of Peter Todd, who, unbeknownst to her parents, wasn't Jessie's soulmate, the love of her life, the possible father of her future unborn children. This man, who she was claiming was now her fiancé, was allegedly her pimp. And this is a tactic that we often see with trafficking. A man will befriend a woman, treat her very well, lure her in, create this perfect boyfriend persona, and pretend that he does want to be her boyfriend. But then as soon as she's comfortable and locked in, he turns around and will start to traffic her. And from what it seemed, Peter did just that. Because in June of 2005, Jessie would be arrested in Nevada for prostitution-related offenses. That same month, Peter allegedly beat her, broke her jaw, and she was hospitalized for this. In September, Jessie would again be arrested for the same reasons. Jessie would finally fly back to Kamloops in December for Christmas, 6 months after she said she'd be back. And this is one of the last photos we have of Jessie during that Christmas. And she looked happy, despite what happened to her in Vegas and what she would soon be going back to. One employee at the escort agency that Jessie was working for would later say that she noticed that Jessie would regularly have bruises on her, and she believed that Jessie was being abused. Now, what I find really interesting is the length of time that Jessie spent in the US. Now, I don't know if the rules were different back there, but I've been traveling to the US for about a decade now, and as far as I know, Canadians are only allowed to stay in the US for 6 months within a 12-month period. And if she went there in April and didn't come back all the way until near Christmas in December, that was more than 6 months. And then we're going to find out that she went back again to spend a longer period of time there. I don't know what any of that actually ever would mean, but I did just find it interesting that Border Patrol allowed her to just go back as long as she wanted. Especially considering she allegedly was getting charged with prostitution and stuff like that, so that would also mean she was working illegally, which you'd think they'd have an issue with that. And as I said, Jessie wasn't in Canada for long, because by Christmas morning, after they opened their presents, Jessie was already talking about flying back to Las Vegas. She seemed extremely eager to have to go back, and that's all she could talk about. Glendine saying, and I quote, "I said, what do you mean? It's Christmas morning." And she said, "No, I want to go back. I really want to see Peter. I really miss him. We couldn't figure it out, but it didn't matter what we said. She was adamant." End quote. So at 2 p.m. on Christmas Day, Jessie was given a ride to the airport by her parents. Her walking through security would be the last time that her family would ever see her alive again. But like last time, they did receive a few phone calls from Jessie once she was back in the US. In one phone call, Jessie allegedly told her sister that she wanted to leave Peter. And the last phone call would come on March 29th of 2006. All calls to her phone went unanswered after that date. By April 9th, when Jessie was no longer answering anyone, her entire family was extremely worried because they could not get in contact with her whatsoever. She was not responding to anyone. She wasn't contacting anyone. And so Glendine would report her daughter missing to the North Las Vegas Police Department. A sergeant by the name of Tom Glazier received the case and headed over to Peter Todd's home. He'd be told by Peter that he had tried to report her missing a few days earlier after she'd moved out of his house suddenly. Police saying, and I quote, "Peter advised Sergeant Glazier that Jessie had moved out of the residence. He showed Sergeant Glazier that all of Jessie's clothes had been removed from the residence." End quote. This residence that Jessie and Peter had been living at was in the vicinity of the 1000 block of Cornerstone Place in North Las Vegas, Nevada. But the story that Peter gave wasn't just so straight cut. It was a little bit deeper than that. According to Peter, on April 3rd, Jessie had left to go to a dentist appointment, and he had also gone out by himself somewhere else. But a while later, when he returned home, he noticed that Jessie wasn't there, and all her belongings were missing with the exception of her makeup and hairdryer. Which, what girl moves out of a home without bringing her makeup? But seeing no signs of foul play at the time, the officer would end up leaving and report back to Jessie's family that according to Peter, she had left and moved out. What is odd though is that despite a small bit of her clothing being missing, a car that she was driving, her car keys, and her toiletries were all left behind. And again, if she was leaving to go somewhere, why wouldn't she take her vehicle and why wouldn't she bring her toiletries? And police would also eventually find this odd as well, because they would end up taking Peter to the police station for an interrogation. It's said that during this interrogation, Peter talked in circles, however, he was cooperative. He didn't offer any new leads, and he didn't make any incriminating statements, so police kind of had their hands tied. Overall, Peter didn't seem to think that anything serious was going on, and he just thought Jessie was off with someone else. Despite the red flags that I feel there is, Peter didn't seem to be considered a suspect. Which is odd to me because when you look at it all laid out, the fact that there are these allegations that he was abusing her and pimping her out, and then she disappears right after telling her sister that she wanted to leave him, that all sounds pretty incriminating to me. Jessie's family would go on to hire a private investigator, and a lot of that information would eventually come out. The information about Jessie being forced into sex work, her being hospitalized for the broken jaw after being beaten. It seems like before this they may have had no idea, but when you really look at it all, it's extremely scary. To add to the red flags, after Jessie's disappearance, she completely stopped using her credit cards, her bank account. Her cell phone was last used on March 28th of 2006, and after that, she completely dropped off the face of the earth. She also apparently had $20,000 in her bank account that she'd gotten from a car accident settlement when she was back in Calgary. And this was money she was planning to use to go to school. So when you really look at all of this, Jessie wasn't hurting for money. So it wasn't like she had no other options other than to work the streets to survive. Jessie had a family that loved her, a family that she could go to for if she needed anything. She could have stayed with them if she needed a place to stay. I'm sure they would have given her money if she truly needed it. But she also was working 2 jobs and had $20,000 saved. So it's not like she had no other options other than to go into sex work, which sometimes is what we see happen. When someone feels like they have no other option, that they look into that line of work because it's fast, easy money. So in my opinion, the idea of her being forced into sex work truly does seem like that is what was happening here. But Jessie wouldn't be the only person to vanish from Las Vegas. Between 2003 and 2006, 3 other sex workers would disappear, and their bodies have all been found, however, Jessie's has not. The home of an unknown person of interest would also be searched by police, and luminol was used. However, no evidence was found inside that home. A decade after Jessie's disappearance, on July 26th of 2015, the Calgary Sun newspaper would report that police were investigating a man by the name of Neil Falls. Police believed that Neil was the suspect in the disappearance and murder of those 4 women in Las Vegas. However, Neil would end up being killed in Charleston, West Virginia on July 18th of 2015 by another sex worker he was attempting to attack in her own home. And from what I briefly read, Neil Falls is suspected to be a serial killer. But there's more than one serial killer that is suspected in this case, because we do have the possible connection of the recently caught serial killer, Rex Heuermann, who has been all over the headlines over the last year. And that is because in 2005, Rex is said to have bought a timeshare condo on the Las Vegas Strip. And it's around that time that multiple women would begin to disappear and be found dead. A 21-year-old escort named Lindsay Harris vanished from Nevada in 2005. Her legs later found on an Illinois highway, and she had long blonde hair just like Jessie did. A few years earlier in 2003, the torso of 19-year-old Las Vegas sex worker Jody Brewer was also discovered wrapped in cloth and plastic in the Mojave Desert in California. 17-year-old Victoria Camara, who was labeled as a sex worker, but she was a minor, so I don't like calling her that actually. But her body would later be found in the Nevada desert near Hall Road. Some of the victims found do have similarities between Rex Heuermann's techniques, with their bodies being found wrapped in bags and found dismembered on the sides of highways, although they're not exactly how he seemed to do it. Some of Rex Heuermann's victims were also found dismembered, which is where that connection's coming in. I really think we have 2 kind of options here of what may have happened to Jessie when we get the theories. I think either Peter had something to do with it, considering there was DV happening. He seemed to be allegedly trafficking her, and there was mention that she was trying to leave him. So all of that combined could have led to something bad happening. I think the other option could be that she did try to leave that day. Maybe she said she was going to the dentist, but then really she was trying to move out of there and get away from Peter. But then possibly she was met by foul play by someone else. And that person could have possibly been a serial killer. And although it hasn't been proven that Jessie was a victim of a serial killer, I think it's highly probable. Glendine saying, and I quote, "They all have similar backgrounds, and Jessie's only thing is she just hasn't been found yet." End quote. But I do truly think that the idea of Peter doing something is also quite likely, considering the circumstances as well. In the aftermath of all of this, Jessie's mother, Glendine, founded Mothers Against Trafficking Humans. And she truly believes that Jessie was kidnapped and forced into sex trafficking, and that she was forced to become a sex slave. She spent the last decade trying to spread the word on Jessie's case, just trying to get her photo out there and her story out there, just in case she is alive out there still and someone spots her. But if she is deceased, Jessie's DNA is registered with NamUs in case unidentified remains are brought in, and they can be tested against her. Jessie is described as being 5'6" and weighing about 115 pounds, with blonde hair and hazel eyes. There's also a picture of her with brown hair in case her image has been altered, which can happen in human trafficking. Her mother saying, and I quote, "I didn't get to see a 30 or 40-year-old Jessie. I don't know what kind of woman she would have been." End quote. Newspapers have printed Jessie's story over the years. They've put her face on playing cards, on the side of buses, anything to try to get new leads. Yet still Jessie has not been found. If you have any information on Jessie's disappearance, or if you think you spotted her, I'll have the information for the authorities down below to contact. But Jessie's case sadly isn't unique. There are hundreds and hundreds of women and men out there who have been trafficked or are currently being trafficked who need help. So I'll have resources down below if you are in that situation or someone you know is. But my heart goes out to Jessie's family. They are extremely strong. They are still fighting for her, and they are still waiting for answers. As always, I hope you all stay safe out there, lock your windows and doors, and I'll see you in the next video.